You're listening to episode 234 of The Secular Buddhist. Welcome to The Secular Buddhist. I'm Ted Meissner. The Secular Buddhist is the official podcast of the Secular Buddhist Association, a grassroots-driven effort to answer the needs of secular teaching and practice for contemporary society. The podcast has interviews and roundtable discussions pertaining to engaged Buddhist training and practice, and the SBA website has show notes for each episode along with resource materials. Though the podcast focuses on core practice from a secular viewpoint, more traditional teachings are welcome and openly discussed. Leigh Brasington returns to speak with us about right concentration, a practical guide to the Jhanas. With all the publicity and interest around mindfulness these days, it seems one slice of the samatha pie is getting the lion's share of attention. And that may be so in practice, too, as the four foundations of mindfulness enjoys a certain celebrity and takes center stage. But that doesn't mean there aren't other areas of interest or practice for meditators, and particularly Buddhists, as concentration or non-distractibility of the jhanas also contributes to our embodiment of the full Eightfold Path. Leigh Brasington is a student of Venerable Ayya Khema and has been teaching jhana meditation since the early 90s. His interest is a naturalistic approach to concentration meditation and helping people understand that deeper meditative states of mind can be helpful off the cushion and can be attained. So, sit back, relax, and have a nice oolong tea. Our guest today returning to us is Leigh Brasington. Leigh, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you. Very nice to be back.
I'm so glad to have you on because I've missed talking with you, honestly. Our last time together was for a week at the Barre Center for Buddhist Studies, and you last joined us in episode 165 way back in spring of 2013. Over a year ago, and that was recorded at and through the courtesy of Barre Center for Buddhist Studies. What have you been up to since?
Well, I've been up to quite a lot, except, I could give you a summary in about 20 words. Mostly what I've been doing is teaching retreats, going on retreats, going sightseeing, visiting my friends. That sort of sums it up. I'm still homeless, still just wandering around. There have been some very interesting retreats I've taught, interesting in the sense that there were students who were quite experienced in meditation, had a deep understanding of the Dharma, had read a lot of suttas, so we had very, very interesting discussions. I got to travel to Europe later in 2013 and taught 5 retreats over there, plus a couple of day-longs, and did quite a bit of sightseeing and got to see my friends in Sweden and England and Germany and France. And yeah, it was a really, really nice trip. I spent some time at the Forest Refuge. I was just getting ready to go in after were there at the Barre Center for Buddhist Studies, so I was in there for a couple months, and then was in again for a month last spring, plus got some other retreat time as well. And I'm planning to go back in for 2 months this spring. And yeah, sightseeing. I took a trip to Yellowstone. I'd never been to Yellowstone before, and it was just stunning, absolutely stunning. Plus, I got to go to other sites around there, Little Bighorn, Battlefield, Devil's Tower, all the stuff around Rapid City, the Badlands, etc. It was really nice. So my life has been great. It's been retreats, attending and teaching, and visiting friends and going sightseeing.
Wonderful. Thanks for sharing about that. And I got to say, for folks who are listening, Leigh's retreats can be tricky to get into. So when you see one as soon as it's posted, apply for that right away. Make sure you get in because they're well worth it.
It's kind of embarrassing how fast they fill up. I mean, it's really a shame because the jhanas, which is why people are signing up, so rapidly, should be a more well-known subject, and there should be more people teaching them. And it's kind of embarrassing that Western Buddhism is relying on a hippie computer programmer to be teaching this stuff.
Yeah, it's true. There are very few teachers who specifically do jhana retreats. You, Shyla, maybe a couple of others doing it. And I'm wondering if that manifests maybe in some of those conversations you have with people who have a strong background in the Dhamma, but maybe not so much experience with jhana. How does that play out?
Yeah, it definitely plays out. People read about the jhanas. They occur, all over the place in the suttas. And then they try and understand it, but the available information is either terse, confusing, or daunting. There's just not much out there. And part of the confusion arises because there's the jhanas as described in the suttas, there's the jhanas as described in the Abhidhamma, there's the jhanas as described in the Visuddhimagga, and then for everyone who teaches them, there's their own idiosyncratic descriptions. So you try and find out about the jhanas, and there's a lot of information, and it just doesn't all mesh together really well because the Visuddhimagga jhanas are actually different animals from the Sutta jhanas.
Yeah, and we had a really wonderful conversation about that in that previous episode, and I'll make sure that that's linked on this episode page as well. But if you're listening to that and you're kind of not sure about what we're talking about, episode 165, just do a search, you'll find it. But today we're here to talk about a book that you've been working on, and you mentioned when we were together, and I was just so delighted to get an email from you saying, hey, the book is going to come out. Do you want to do that interview? And I was like, yes, I would love to. So the new book is slated to come out in fall of this year, 2015, when we're recording this. I just pre-ordered mine, and I'm very excited by that. Tell us what prompted you to write a book about the jhanas.
The amount of information about the jhanas that's easily available is, small and confusing. I decided, okay, I just have to share what I have learned so far in a way that is more accessible than, with 24 people on a retreat a half a dozen times a year, and try and just basically do a brain dump. This is what I have learned about the jhanas since 1990 when I started practicing them. And so it was basically to share my own experiences and my own understanding of what's out there.
And Leigh, you had mentioned this before, but I'm wondering if you would characterize it again, that the way you teach and your particular focus on the jhana is different than some other teachers. How would you uniquely carve out your approach to jhanas? What's different about Leigh's jhanas?
Well, most people who are teaching jhanas are teaching what's described in the Visuddhimagga. I'm teaching what's described in the suttas. But also, jhanas are not an easy practice. They're really something that if you're going to get the most out of them, you need to be on a long retreat, like a month or 6 months or something like that. But most people who are interested in the jhanas are lay people who don't spend most of their time meditating. So what I've done is take the description of the jhanas as found in the suttas and teach according to that description, but perhaps with a less emphasis on as deep a concentration, so that people can learn, okay, this is what the states feel like, this is how you get there, and if I get a chance to go on a longer retreat, all I've got to do is this, and I can deepen these states so that they are more like what the Buddha was experiencing. Or perhaps I should say, like what some of his disciples were experiencing. But basically, I've tried to make it so that they are accessible to a layperson on a 10-day retreat. And I got this idea because my teacher, the late Venerable Ayakema, was doing exactly the same thing.
So the book's subtitle interested me, A Practical Guide to the Jhanas. Can you tell us a little bit more about that practicality? Because it's almost like you're suggesting jhanas might be for more than just monastics.
Right. The jhanas are certainly for more than just monastics. The full title is Right Concentration, A Practical Guide to the Jhanas. And the instructions that I give in there are practical in the sense that someone who has a serious meditation practice perhaps can use the instructions to learn the jhanas when they're on a self-retreat or when they're on a retreat with someone else who's not teaching jhanas. Now, that's kind of a subversive thing to say, is I'll use my book and do something other than what the teacher tells you. Since this is being recorded, I will say clear that with the teacher first. But practical in the sense this is something that a layperson can use, something that a layperson can learn and use effectively.
So tell us about the contents of the book. What's the overall structure like?
Right. So there's three parts. The first part is basically, I start out by saying you can't learn jhanas from a book. They're not something that lend themselves to book learning. But you're now holding in your hand a book about the jhanas. So I'm going to give you the instructions to the very best of my ability. And so I just lay out the instructions just like I would give them on a 10-day or 2-week retreat. Okay, here's what you need to do as preliminaries. Here's what you've got to do when you sit down to meditate. Here's how you can work with the hindrances. Here's what it feels like to get to access. Here's how you approach the first jhana. Here's what it feels like. So basically just practical instructions, even though the jhanas don't lend themselves to book learning. But it's the best that I could do, is just lay all that out. That's part one. Part two starts off by saying, I know what I just described is not the orthodox understanding of the jhanas, but it is what's found in the suttas. And taking a cue from Ajahn Buddhadasa, who was very big on not following the orthodoxy and teaching in the way he felt was much more helpful, he backed up everything he said with impeccable sutta scholarly research. And that's what part two is, my attempt at the scholarly research to back up what I've taught in part one, examining what's given in the suttas, looking at the words, teasing out what they actually meant at the time of the Buddha, not 900 years later when the Visuddhimagga was written, and seeing exactly what is described there and showing that what I outlined in part one really does match what's described in the suttas. And then the third part of the book is some appendices. I did a brain dump. I just wrote everything that I could think of. I had no idea how much material I would need for a book, and so I just wrote it all down. Now, everything didn't make the cut. The appendices are a half dozen of the things I wrote that I and my editor at Shambhala felt were the most important ones. The other dozen that didn't make the cut are on the website rc.leib.com, rc.leighb.com. And I just basically, okay, if you have a DVD, you have the extra scenes. Okay, so you go to my website and you get the extra appendices, and they're all there. Things like discussing Visuddhimagga jhanas and Abhidhamma jhanas and the famous nimitta, which doesn't show up in the Sutta jhanas.
So what might readers learn about concentration that they might not have expected or known before?
Well, one of the things that I think people are going to be startled about, if they've perhaps heard of the jhanas, they've heard of the 5 factors of the first jhana. Well, the suttas only talk about 4 factors, so that might be a little startling. And furthermore, 2 of the factors are vitakka and vichara, which are usually described as initial and sustained attention to the meditation object. Except that's not what those words meant to the Buddha. That's what they meant to the commentators 900 years after the Buddha. And they just meant thinking, which basically implies that when you're in the first jhana, your mind hasn't completely settled down. You've got some wispy background thinking, probably commenting on, whoa, wow, this is exciting. I like this thing. Something like that. Okay. But as you calm down from that and move on to the second, then this background thinking drops away. So the whole definition of what constitutes the first jhana is going to be surprising for people that have been, taught the Visuddhimagga approach to the jhanas, where it's all about one-pointedness and initial and sustained attention. And the suttas just simply don't describe that.
Yeah, I seem to recall there being a great deal of stock being put on the appearance of the nimitta. And until that point, really, it just doesn't count.
Right. And this is exactly what the Visuddhimagga says. You've got to have a nimitta. And the word nimitta, of course, does show up in the suttas, but it just means sign, in the sense of if your stomach is rumbling, it's a sign that you're hungry. Okay. If your breath gets very shallow when you're doing anapanasati, mindfulness of breathing, the shallow breath is a sign you're getting concentrated. And that's all that it ever meant. It never refers to a circle of light or anything like that until, some many centuries after the Buddha's death. So, that might surprise people as well. Unfortunately, the nimitta appendix didn't make the printed copy of the book, but as I said, it's all available on the website.
And we'll be linking to that as well. So, Leigh, what are you most hoping readers will take away from the book? What do you want to share with the listeners most?
The jhanas are a very important aspect of the Buddha's teachings. They're I almost want to say an essential part of it, though that may be pushing it a bit, but they're certainly a very, very important part of it. And they are learnable for a significant percentage of serious meditators. Not everybody finds the jhanas approachable, but for those who do, they can make a very positive addition to one's practice. Basically, what the Buddha was teaching was clean up your act. In other words, keep the precepts. Learn to concentrate your mind. And his technique was learn the jhanas. And then examine reality and understand what's actually happening. And that's the insight practice. So with a well-concentrated mind, your insight practice is going to be turbocharged. The hope of the book is that some people I know will actually be able to read the instructions, and because they have the right circumstances and the right skills of concentration, actually find these for themselves. The majority of people will read the book and go, oh, this sounds like it's possible. And then hopefully they can find a retreat where there is the support that they need, some teacher that can basically point them, hey, you're running off into the ditch to the left, go to the right. Okay, so give them the instructions to fine-tune what they're attempting to do based on what's found in the book. And then, those people who have these concentration skills, those skills are then highly useful on the spiritual path. For people that don't have concentration skills, they have other skills and they can use those. But for people like me who were a computer programmer where, they paid me big bucks to concentrate. It's kind of nice to be able to use that skill on the spiritual path.
Yeah, and it's interesting that even if one doesn't find a deep absorption, which is perhaps what many of us have been thinking of as the jhanas and the nimitta and all that we've heard from the Visuddhimagga, it doesn't mean that this isn't a practice that can still be of benefit to you, even if it's just some basic attentional focus.
Exactly. Even if you can only get to access concentration, which most everybody can do, at least on a long retreat, access concentration is going to enhance your insight practice. If you can get to the jhanas, that'll enhance it a bit more. I mean, you get a turbocharged mind for doing the insight practice. If you can get to the Visuddhimagga jhanas, great. But unfortunately, the number of people that have the time to actually go into that depth, we're lay people. We just don't have time for 6 months retreats very often. And that seems to be what it really takes to get to the depth that's being described in the Visuddhimagga. So the whole idea is use whatever depth of concentration you can generate as part of your spiritual practice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I found letting go of that goal helps you ease your striving and actually helps you with your access.
Exactly. One thing that Ayakema said that was really important was no result thinking. And I warn people at the start of every retreat, don't have any expectations of learning the jhanas. That's only going to get in the way of learning the jhanas. So it's more about, okay, just chill out and be with your experience as it is. The simile that Aya used was if you have a set of directions and you're going to drive from San Francisco to New York, it does you no good to start looking for New York as you're going across the Bay Bridge. If you do that, you're probably going to have an accident. It's much better to pay attention to what you're doing right now, what signpost you're to look for when you're to change to start doing something else. And it's the same thing with the instructions for the jhanas. It just trying to learn them can be helpful for focusing in on what's going on right here, right now, without getting caught up on, and what's going to happen 5 minutes from now, or 10 minutes from now, or 2 years from now.
Yeah, it's often that relaxation helps silence that voice in the back of our mind's car. Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet?
Exactly. I tell the students the attitude to have on the spiritual path is one of relaxed diligence. Most Westerners do the diligent part okay. We need to work on the relaxed part.
Well, our guest today has been Leigh Brasington. Leigh, thank you so much for being here. If you want to find out more about Leigh and his work, the website, which I'll be linking on the episode page, is leighb.com. That's Leighb as in boy.com. Leigh, thanks for being here.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the SBA website at secularbuddhism.org, and you'll find an entire webpage devoted to this and every episode. Discussion about this episode can be found on the episode page itself, along with show notes. The music for The Secular Buddhist is used by permission from John Kaizen Neptune's CD, Steps in Time. Additional music is provided courtesy of Monty Levinson of Taihei Shakuhachi and Rodrigo Rodriguez. Their websites are also linked on the SBA site on the About Podcast Music page. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on The Secular Buddhist.